Have you ever noticed how people, like even ourselves, kind of shift how we talk? I mean, depending on who we're with, like you probably wouldn't use the same slang with your grandma as you do with your friends.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's like we all have these different versions of ourselves that we present to the world,
Okay, so that's kind of what we're diving into today. We've got a few articles and some clips about Vice President Kamala Harris and how her accent seems to change, well, maybe, depending on the audience.
Yeah, it's been sparking a lot of debate, especially on social media. Yeah, some are calling it inauthentic. Others say she's just connecting with people.
All right, so let's get specific. One article focuses on a speech Harris gave at a predominantly Black church in Philadelphia on October 27th.
Right, and this is where the whole pastor accent thing kind of blew up. A lot of commentators, mostly those leaning right, pointed out how her cadence and tone sounded a lot like a preacher. Some even compared it to Martin Luther King Jr.'s style.
Wow, okay. We actually had a clip from that speech. Let's take a quick listen. So what do you think? I mean, just based on that short clip, does it strike you as different from her usual way of speaking?
It's tough to say. From such a small sample, I think it's more about the overall impression that people got from the entire speech, combined with, their existing opinions about her.
Makes sense. And speaking of opinions, social media was like a whirlwind after that speech. Some folks calling her out, saying she's being fake, putting on an act, others defending her, saying it's normal to adapt your style to the audience.
It's definitely a complex issue, and it gets even more tangled, I think, because this isn't the first time Harris's accent has been, a hot topic.
Oh, you're right. Back in September, there was that whole thing at a Labor Day rally in Detroit, where some compared her accent to Foghorn Leghorn, that cartoon rooster.
Yeah, the Foghorn Leghorn incident. Not exactly the comparison a politician wants, right? It definitely added fuel to the fire.
So how did the White House respond to all this? Weren't they asked about it?
Oh, yeah, totally. Fox News reporter Peter Doocy actually pressed White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre on this during a press conference.
What did she say? I can only imagine how that went down.
Well, Jean-Pierre basically shut it down, called it a ridiculous question and pivoted back to policy issues.
Interesting tactic. It makes you wonder, is there a double standard for women in politics? You think a male politician would be scrutinized in the same way for their accent?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Historically, women in positions of power have faced way more scrutiny over their appearance, their voices, their mannerisms, things that often get a pass for men,
Yeah. It's like they're constantly under a microscope. Every little thing gets analyzed and judged. But getting back to Harris and this whole accent thing, it reminds me of code switching. Have you ever heard of that?
Code switching, of course. It's fascinating, really. It basically means adjusting your language, tone, even your accent to fit in with different social groups.
Right. And it's not necessarily a conscious thing either. Sometimes it just happens naturally.
Right.
Without you even realizing it.
Exactly. Like, our brains are wired to connect with people. And part of that connection involves adapting to their communication style. But there's a flip side to this whole code switching thing. It can lead to some tricky questions about authenticity.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like, when is it genuine? And when does it come across as calculated or worse, like pandering?
Exactly. It's a fine line. And it's not always easy to tell where that line is. Perception plays a huge role here. What might seem authentic to one person could feel totally fake to someone else.
So where do we go from here? I mean, this whole conversation about Kamala Harris's accent got me thinking about the bigger picture, this pressure on public figures to be authentic. But in a world where everything is so carefully curated and image is everything, is that even possible?
That's a great question. It's like we're all obsessed with finding the real person behind that carefully constructed persona, But maybe, just maybe, we're putting too much emphasis on this whole idea of authenticity.
Yeah, maybe it's less about being authentic in some absolute sense and more about being genuine within the context you're in, right? Like if you're speaking to a group that shares certain cultural references or ways of speaking, it's natural to want to connect with them on that level.
I think you're onto something there. Yeah, it's about finding a balance between being true to yourself and being sensitive to the context you're in.
So instead of getting caught up in whether someone is being authentic in some perfect way, maybe we should be asking ourselves, are they being genuine in their intentions? Are they trying to connect with people in a meaningful way?
I like that. Yeah, it's a more nuanced and generous way to approach it. It's about looking beyond the surface and trying to understand the motivations behind someone's words and actions.
And that requires a bit more effort than just jumping to conclusions based on a soundbite or a tweet, right?
Absolutely. It requires critical thinking, empathy, and a willingness to consider different perspectives.
So bringing it back to Kamala Harris, you think there's any merit to the criticisms of her speaking style? Or is it all just political posturing?
It's tough to say for sure. There's always going to be subjectivity when it comes to judging someone's communication style. What one person finds relatable, another might find totally off-putting. It's all about perception.
That's fair. But I can't help but wonder if she's being held to a different standard than some of her male counterparts.
It's certainly possible, as we talked about earlier, women in politics, especially women of color, often face an extra layer of scrutiny. Their appearance, their voices, their every move is analyzed under a microscope.
It's like she's navigating this intersection of gender, race, and power dynamics. And every word she utters is dissected and debated.
Exactly. And that level of scrutiny can be incredibly difficult to deal with, I think. It's hard to know what's legitimate criticism and what's just plain biased attacks.
It's almost a no-win situation. If she tries to adapt her style to connect with certain audiences, she's accused of being inauthentic. But if she stays consistent, she risks coming across as out of touch, or even alienating certain groups.
It highlights the tightrope that women, and particularly women of color, often have to walk. In the public eye, they're constantly judged on multiple levels, and there's very little room for error.
It makes you wonder if all this constant scrutiny and criticism discourages other women from pursuing leadership roles.
That's a really important point. If the bar is set impossibly high for women, it can definitely deter them from entering the political arena, which would be a huge loss for our democracy.
Absolutely. We need diverse voices and perspectives in leadership to ensure our government truly reflects the people it serves. So what should we as citizens keep in mind when we're evaluating politicians, especially when it comes to their communication styles?
It's crucial to be aware of our own biases. Are we judging women more harshly than men? Are we holding people of color to a different standard? Are our own preconceived notions clouding our judgment? We need to be critical consumers of information and recognize how our own filters might be shaping our opinions.
And are we getting too caught up in the theatrics of it all? Are we focusing so much on style over substance that we're losing sight of the actual issues that matter?
That's a great point. It's easy to get swept up in the drama and the sound bites, but we need to remember that politics is about more than just performance. It's about real people and real lives.
Right. At the end of the day, politicians are human beings, just like us. They're not perfect, and they're going to make mistakes.
Exactly. And while we should absolutely hold them accountable for their actions and decisions, we should also remember to extend a bit of grace and understanding. It's a tough job, constantly being scrutinized and judged.
So it's about finding that balance, right? Holding our leaders accountable,
right,
while also recognizing their humanity.
Exactly. And that requires nuance and empathy, which can be hard to maintain in today's world, especially with social media amplifying everything. But it's essential if we want a more productive and civil political discourse.
Well said. This has been a really thought-provoking conversation. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap things up?
I think the big takeaway here is don't jump to conclusions about someone just because of how they speak. Language is a tricky thing, It's shaped by so many factors, background, culture, even the situation you're in.
So it's like reading between the lines, right?
Yeah.
Don't just focus on the accent or the tone, but try to understand what's behind the word.
Exactly. And remember, people can be authentic in all sorts of ways. It doesn't have to look or sound the same for everyone.
Yeah, I feel like that's something we often forget in this age of social media. It's so easy to reduce someone to a soundbite or a tweet, but real communication is way more complex than that.
Absolutely. So instead of getting hung up on this whole is it authentic or not debate, maybe we should be asking ourselves, what's the message here? What's the intention behind the words?
And what impact are those words having? Are they bringing people together or driving them further apart?
Those are the questions that really matter, right? The ones that help us move beyond the superficial and engage with the substance of the conversation.
Well said. I think that's a great point to end on. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. It's a reminder to be more mindful of how we judge others, especially those in the public eye.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the drama and the quick judgments, but it's important to step back and consider the bigger picture. We're all human, and we all deserve a bit of understanding.
Right, and maybe a little less scrutiny over every word and inflection. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and to our listeners, thanks for listening. Until next time, keep those minds open and those conversations flowing.